And this is a concept that I'd really love to see applied at a climate scale. It probably is starting to be applied, probably just in a different name. So the idea is that you have a representation of the world, so an eco-part and eco-signature ecosystem, but in the models I use, it's the physics and the animals and the people. So you have a representation of how the people use the system, and then you have a representation of how people assess the system. And this little fisheries model here doesn't have perfect information of this world, doesn't have complete information. They have the same kinds of patching information and the same kinds of errors that we would have compared to the real world. So you're representing every part of the adaptive management process. You've got how the world functions, how we use the world, how we see the world through data, how the decisions are made, then how that feeds back through economics and social pressures. Actually, the arrow should go back up through there. How that dictates how people use the system. So that you can test how robust that whole management system is for any errors that you have along the way. So for a long time in fisheries, they just assumed if these guys here told these guys what to do, then they just do it. And if you look at all the fisheries collapses around the world, typically it was because the fishermen didn't do what the management expected. It wasn't always that the management made a bad decision. Sometimes it was just that the fishermen didn't do what they expected. So example would be in Sweden, where there's a thing called cap and trade quotas, that the fishermen get an allocation of fish and they can trade between them, and it's supposed to be a great way of giving people a sense of property rights and stewardship. And so they tried to introduce it in lots of fisheries around the world. And there was a small cod fishery in Sweden. And they brought it in there, and what happened was the fishing pressure on the cod went up instead of down. Because what they'd forgotten was that was a summer-only fishery. The guys had owned their boats for 1,000 years. They didn't want to go fishing in winter because that was disgusting. It was really just get a bit of extra food through winter. You know, you catch it in the summer and store it for winter. But when they brought in a quota, they did what made sense in Australia or North America. They want to get rid of people who aren't really fishing seriously because they could suddenly turn on later down the track. So they put in a rule that you had to fish for at least 100 days a year, you had to have a boat of a certain size, none of which matched what the people really did. So they forced them to get bigger boats and fish longer through the year just to be allowed to fish at all. So it doesn't always match what you anticipated, even with the best intentions, if you don't set up the right incentives in the people. So by playing all of that out in the model world, you can check for that. And so that's something I'd like to see as we get truly integrated assessment models where the physics and the humans are in together. I'd love to see those kind of games played, or those kind of methods used in the climate. So what you can do inside the Ecosim is you can define your control rules. So a lot of fisheries, what they do is they say, there's sort of like a target fishing level we want to do till we get to a point where the biomass is too low, then you decline it, and if it's still too low, you shut it off. It's called a broken stick, because it's kind of shaped of a broken stick. We're not very inventive with names in the fisheries world. So you can draw those, or you can have other kinds of management options in here around quota shares and all that kind of stuff. And then you basically turn the handle and see how it plays out, and you play multiple Monte Carlo runs, and you can see for some species there's a lot of jiggle in what you get back as a resulting biomass, and some are pretty flat. You can also look at probabilities of catch under the different rules, and you can compare them to what your objectives and your expectations are. So some of the places, just to give you a couple of quick examples of where Ecosim has been used. Last year there was a paper in Science that looked at lower trophic level fisheries around the world. So this is landings and all of the forage fish from the FAO data. And we looked at the different fish, the small, lower trophic level fisheries around the world. And each one of these locations, there was an Ecosim model and one other kind of system end-to-end model to see if we could get similar answers in the different places. And basically, regardless, across all those different models, you got roughly the same shape. That there was this kind of, as you depleted the species, you got more, basically fish the species to extinction. There was a dome shape to how much catch you could catch. But what was interesting was how flat it was. So really, you didn't have to fish very hard to get the maximum catch. And by being so flat, you could stay at this end, which meant there was plenty left for the predators. So you could have sustainable small pelagic fisheries. If You can see though, as you deplete the species more and more, you are affecting more and more of the groups in the system. By more than, we just had an arbitrary number of more than 40% because it seemed to be what most Department of Environment rules around the world thought was the point where they had to start to count. What you can see in the different locations were that you get a different result depending on which small pelagic you fish, so not all the curves. So these are the proportions up the side of the number of other groups affected. You can see in some fisheries, some areas like the North Sea, not too many other groups got upset, but in the Northern Humboldt, quite a large number of groups got very quickly upset if you took away their food. One of the interesting things was the differences between the different models. So if you look at this part of Australia, the Atlantis model was over a much larger area, so the animals could move. But the Atlantis animals didn't show as much response because they changed their diet way more than they did in Ecosim. So having the different models meant we could explore some of that uncertainty between the model structures as well. That's a couple of my examples, but it sounds like we've got some from Rashid as well. So while Rashid gets himself sorted out, is there any questions on Ecosim?
When we observe the real world, we see systems reaching a climatic state and then ultimately disturbed and crashing. Is that an emergence property that may come out of such a model, or do you need to be thinking about that?
So when you're putting your model together, you want to allow for it. You don't want to hardwire it, but you want to allow for them to have alternative stages. So it's about thinking about what groups should be important, are they there? So not necessarily just writing all the resources straight away. So they can groups to be important ones later.
Beth, what's the response of fishing communities to this modeling approach for managing their fisheries?
It can depend on the culture. So obviously in some of the teachers' cultures, they're quite nervous about the points that Raghu brought up, so how you handle uncertainty. In other cultures, they don't mind the uncertainty and they like to explore it with you. In Australia, when we first did it, my supervisor was quite terrified that they would kill me because they would have very aggressive responses to the stock assessment guys who would get up with what seemed like a simpler model than I was about to present. We actually got completely the different opposite response. They said, finally you get, it's not just me and that particular fish, it's the whole rest of the system. And that's actually the more universal response that you get. The fishermen who are out there every day do see the birds and the environment and the other animals in the system. So they're actually usually much more positive about seeing more species and a greater slab of the world taken into account. They don't feel as adversarial being put about it. But uncertainty probably is a very important thing to still keep in mind. Yep.
Can you add or potentially add external variables to the fisheries thing? For example, if you want to speculate, if some of the fishermen would move to aquaculture, where would be your balance? What resources would you need to change, or it's too far-fetched for these models?
No, you can include, well, I can always butcher a model to do what I want it to do. So typically what's done in the simplest version is you make it a stationary fishery. It doesn't go anywhere, it has a stop. But you can do those combination of things. And if you use things like stocks and flow models and other models, you can certainly tackle it. What's happening now more and more in these modelling approaches is they're starting to couple with each other. So for instance, we've just had a project finish in Australia where we had a hydrodynamic model with an embedded NPZD that we replaced the plankton and Ecosim with, or actually Ecospace that we'll play with tomorrow. And we had Ecospace for the highest trophic levels. They had a different model again for the humans on the top, so we could bring in other sectors. So you're sort of plugging and playing the bits you like out of each of the models, or the easy bits, so you get what you want. So yeah, there is the potential. It's got the technology. I don't know how many of you saw the $6 million man, there's a small child idea. We have the technology, so yeah, we can start to play. Yes, exactly. Can you just back to Rashid?
Beth just showed you a slide also of the policy search engine, and I have a few slides just to expand on that. I think in 2004 there was EcoPath or Ecosim workshop or conference held between UDC and FAO. And Carl and Willie and Daniel gave presentations. And I made a short presentation after them and told them that, look here, for this to be useful, I think we need something like a policy search engine in there. Because if you look at Ecosim, at the bottom they have an interface where you can just draw in the effort pattern you want to see, right? So the user will say, okay, I start off with 0 effort, and in year 5 I have some effort, and then let's see how it runs. And that was when I said, you know, this is too mechanical. For a policy maker or manager or even an economist, you want to say, what is the objective? What do you want to achieve? And then based on that, you put up an optimization system that will then optimize the larger system to meet your objective. So that was how the policy search engine was built into the system. And so these are a few slides just to show you some of the thinking behind it. This you already know, right? The website and so on, where you can find the system. And the key thing is the optimization methods in there to search for fishing policies that will maximize a particular policy goal or objective function for money. So that's the aim of that. You want to optimize things. So we did some brainstorming and said, what are the kind of things people want to optimize usually from their EZ or their ocean or waters? And we came up with 4, and I think those 4 are still in the system now. The first thing is you want to maximize fisheries rent. People know what fisheries rent are, or resource rent. It's simply the surplus. So you catch fish, you sell it for some revenue, and it costs you to catch it. You find the difference. If your cost is lower, the difference is your rent. So that's essentially very simple definition. So people want to maximize rent or even profit, right? So that's the first thing. If that is your objective, how will you want to manage your ecosystem in order to achieve this? Then the second one is governance we're going to talk about. Is we want to maximize social benefits. So what are social benefits? You have to nail people down. And in this system, what we assume to be the social benefit is the number of jobs that are supported by your fishery or your ecosystem. Very simple definition of social benefits. Anthropologists and sociologists go after us for simplifying social benefits so simply. And that is what we have here. Then you have this thing we put in there that says maximize mandated rebuild. So you can't have an ecosystem that you have come to the conclusion that is with a fish, and you say we want to rebuild. So it's mandated. This is something coming from the Supreme Court. You have to rebuild this, and so that is imposed, and you set out to do that. How will you achieve it? A very simple example of that is when you have an ecosystem, so we are not going to hunt the whales, for example. That is a country says, no, we don't want to touch the whales. That is how we do it. So it's mandated, and you impose that in your model, and you run it. So that is that. And the other one is you could also say, hey, we want to maximize the ecosystem structure. We want to have a fishery that lives with the ecosystem that is maximized in terms of its structure. What we mean by that, that means you don't want all the big fish to be gone, for example. You want a balanced system. As you know, usually we catch the big pricey fish first. You say, no, you have to catch everything in a way that the structure is balanced, and that you can impose. So we evaluate the fleet configuration that optimizes each of these conflicts, conflictive or conflicting objectives. So you can optimize them. You can say, my goal is just to make money and nothing else matters. And you run your system, or any of these, or actually a combination of them. You can put weights also. I want a bit of money, I want a bit of jobs, my system should be reasonably okay, and some mandated rebuilding. So